Today my talk is about the art of giving and taking correction. It's an essential life skill for anyone, and how well you're able to do both will really affect your life a lot. So what is correction? Let's first take a look at what it isn't. So some of us will weld correction to different things. And just a reminder, if you weren't here for that talk, when we weld something is when we connect two separate terms together that are actually different. For example, if we weld public speaking with humiliation, public speaking doesn't necessarily have to be humiliation, but some people do weld that together. If you need a bit more of a recap on welds and fusions, make sure to listen back to Stan's talk on it. But if we're looking at correction, some things that we weld to correction is rejection, open season criticism, or being unkind or mean. So let's stop for a moment and think about the consequences of some of those welds. If you weld correction with rejection, then any time that someone corrects you, you'll feel like they're rejecting you as a person. And you'll feel unsafe and you'll feel attacked, right? Therefore, to protect yourself from that possibility of being rejected, you might feel like you can never do anything wrong ever. Or you may never own up to a mistake or apologize. So personally, I struggled with this a lot. And especially when I first started working about 8 years ago, I welded correction with rejection. So when I did things wrong, instead of just apologizing and saying, sorry, I did that wrong, I would try and talk my way out of it and be like, oh, that's not what I thought, or blah, 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 whatever. And it meant that for my colleagues and my boss, that it was really hard for them to help me. And I seriously considered quitting journalism in the first 6 months of working, because I thought, maybe it's the job's not for me. It's the job's issue, but really it was my issue. And the truth was, I'd only just started the job, and it was my first job out of university, my first proper career kind of job. Of course I'm going to make mistakes. How could I expect myself to be perfect and get everything right and do everything right? And the thing is, the more I practiced, the better I got. So that's correction, welding correction with rejection. What if you weld correction with open season criticism? Now first, what I mean by open season criticism is basically, it's you feel like it's free game to criticize someone really cruelly and tear them down. So I've shared this story before. Me and Jerry were in Taiwan at the zoo, and when we were there, we saw a young couple. And all of a sudden, we heard the wife ask her husband, oh, where's the lid? And then he replied, oh, I threw it away. And then she said really loudly, you idiot, why did you do that? And then she started swearing at him, really loudly. And it was really shocking for us. It was just to do that so publicly and so loudly. And, imagine the consequences of this supposed correction, right? And the impact that would have on their relationship. So what if you weld correction with being unkind, or it's mean to correct someone? Then you'll most likely avoid giving correction, right? Let me know if this scenario sounds familiar. You're at work or at uni and you're trying to get your project across the line, but someone in your team has done something wrong. And you don't want to tell them it's wrong, because if you do, that means you're going to be mean. So then you decide, okay, I'll just redo their portion on top of all the work you already have to do. But then you end up being resentful and really burnt out. And imagine if you go about your whole life this way. Like always not telling someone that they've done something wrong and just doing it for them instead. It's not my idea of a good time, that's for sure. So you can see that there are some very real consequences for these negative words to correction. So if that's not correction, then what is? Well, correction is the act of discipline and giving feedback or instruction on something that we say or do. So the goal of it is to help someone to become better and improve, and it should be done out of love. Therefore, if we are giving correction, we need to be in the mindset that it's for the other person. And if we are receiving correction, we need to be in the mindset that, this person is helping me. The Bible also actually has a lot to say about correction. And I've written down a few verses, and I thought instead of me, reading them all of them out, you guys could take turns reading them. So they're just here. I don't know if there's enough for everyone, but maybe we can just take one, pass it on until there's no more left. Cool. Some of them are quite spicy. From Proverbs. Cool.
It's a good one.
So do you want to start, Jerry?
Just read it out.
Yeah, just read it out.
Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid.
Whoever heeds discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray. Proverbs 10:17.
Whoever heeds life-giving correction will be at home among the wise. Those who disregard discipline despise themselves, but the one who heeds correction gains understanding. That was 15:31-32.
Whoever heeds discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray. Proverbs 10:17.
Whoever spoils the rod hates the children, but the one who loves the children is carefully to discipline them. Proverbs 13:4.
Cool.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Proverbs 1:7.
Discipline children, for in it there is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death. Proverbs 19:18.
Stern discipline awaits anyone who leaves the path. The one who hates correction will die. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 10.
Cool. So, like I said, spicy. So I just wanted to summarize what we learnt from those verses. We can see that taking correction, so if we receive correction, it means that we are wise, that you will gain understanding, and that it is the way to life. But if you choose not to take correction, you choose stupidity, you despise yourself, you will lead others astray, and you will die. Also, if you don't give correction, you hate the person, and you are a willing party to their death. So that's pretty strong, right?
Yeah.
So guys, correction is the way to grow and improve. So by avoiding receiving correction, you are limiting yourself. And by avoiding giving correction, you are robbing others of a chance to grow and improve. So then let's look more specifically at receiving correction. Who should you take it from? Well, the first and most important person is God. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 and 12 says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights in." So, as Christians, we're all in the process of being sanctified. So that means we will fail and do things wrong, but that's very normal. And God is there to discipline us because he loves us. Remember, correction is to help us. God will meet us where we are We don't need to be at a certain level or do a certain thing for him to love us. But because he loves us, he doesn't leave us where we are. Here's an example. You know, my sister-in-law gave birth to my niece last year, and she's really cute. Totally not biased, but she's a very good-looking baby. But she can't really do much for herself at the moment. You know, she needs help to eat. She needs help to clean. She needs help to get dressed, like everything. No one questions this because it's very normal. She's a baby. But suppose my niece never learns how to do anything for herself. You know, 10, 20 years' time, she still expects her parents to do everything for her. You know, that's not really cute anymore. What is loving and good for my niece is for her parents to correct her and teach her how to do stuff herself. And that's what God wants for us. And so you might ask then, you know, what does God's discipline or correction look like? Well, he definitely warns us in the Bible, you know, of what's not good for us, right? For example, you know, he warns us against worshipping other idols. It's not only a sin against God, but in the long run, we harm ourselves because we rob ourselves of a growing relationship with God, and which is so much better than like any idol could be. But God's discipline and correction also, you know, allows us to experience the consequences of our actions. Let's take my niece as an example again. You know, what do you think would happen if she never got disciplined by her parents for lying and stealing? What kind of message would they send her? That it's okay to lie and steal. How would that affect her life, and how would that turn out when she becomes an adult? Go around stealing and lying. You know, we heard earlier, you know, that proverb about to not give children correction is to hate them and to be a willing party to their death. Well, so we can see that when God allows us to experience the consequences of our actions, that actually is love, because he's teaching us like, hey, that's not good for you. That's not okay. This is and this is why. So take correction from God. Other people to take correction from, according to the Bible, is from friends. In Proverbs chapter 27, verses 5-6, it says, "Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses." And later on in that same chapter in verse 9, it says, "Perfume and incense bring joy to the heart, and the pleasantness of a friend springs from their heartfelt advice." So, you know, friends are people who you can trust, you know, who really care about you, and they want what's best for you. So when they give you correction, like, remember that they're not attacking you. In that verse in Proverbs, it says an enemy multiplies kisses. What that means is, you know, someone who just flatters you, they just tell you what you want to hear all the time and they never disagree with you, that's not a friend. They are an enemy to your growth and your well-being. Other people you can take correction from is people who have more experience than you. You know, have you ever had to train someone at work? You know, it's a breeze when they listen to you, you know, and they don't get defensive when you tell them how to do something, right? But aren't the people who can't take correction the worst people to train? Can you contest to that, Reiko? Yeah. So, you know, people like your parents, your pastors, your leaders at church, you know, there are all people that you can take correction from. And here's a little bit of a tricky bit, because apart from God, not everyone's correction will be right 100% of the time. And also, you know, what if it's correction from a stranger? So there does need to be some discernment. And so how I discern is, like, I ask myself, is this person genuinely trying to help me? Is that their motivation? Secondly, what is the fruit I can see in their life regarding the area that they're correcting me in? And thirdly, just simply, does what they're saying make sense? Yeah. Okay. So that's, we've gone through a lot of stuff, and here comes the hard part, which is actually taking the correction. And first, you really do need to have an accurate view of correction. So if you have any of those negative words that I talked about, you have to deal with them, guys. Have to reframe them and get the correct view. Now, as someone, who's really struggled with taking correction, the most effective way for me to help me to receive it is to tell myself truth coaches and get used to receiving correction by asking for feedback. So some of the truth coaches that have really helped me are the following. I don't want to simply stay at the level I am in 5-10 years' time. So correction helps me to improve. I am not being rejected. They are correcting me because they care for me. If a thing's worth doing, it's okay to do badly while I get better, because all beginnings are hard. Though I've failed in doing something, I am not a failure unless I fail to learn something from it. No one gets to become really good at something without messing up and needing to be corrected. When I first started writing talks for house church, Jerry wanted to hear what I wrote, but I didn't want to read my draft to him. And I realized that I didn't want to because I was afraid of his correction. I wanted to avoid being corrected. But then he reminded me that, hey, I love you, and that me giving you feedback is not rejecting you. And it was to help me improve, right? And I also asked myself, what is more important? For people to get the clearest message that they can get, or for me to protect my unbearable feeling? And I'm happy to say that now I ask Jerry to listen to my talks, even if I've only written a little bit of it. So it's really practice. And you might ask, what if correction doesn't come in, the kind and caring way that Jerry displayed? Because sometimes people correct us and it's quite rude, right? So here's my challenge. It's not a reason to dismiss the correction. I'm not saying it's easy, but just because someone corrects you rudely doesn't mean what they're saying isn't true. So when I find myself in that kind of scenario, what I found helpful is to focus on what they are saying, the advice, and not the manner of delivery. However, in saying that, I would also make it clear to them, because, you have to stick up for your own boundaries, that while I appreciate their advice, I don't appreciate the way they've delivered it, right? And this ties into the next part of my talk, which is about giving correction. For me, if taking correction is hard, giving correction is on another level. Because for someone who can, quite easily turn to people-pleasing as a quick fix, I worry about their reaction after I've corrected them. So it's quite hard. But first, again, let's look at who we should correct. Because the Bible, again, has a lot to say about this. In Proverbs chapter 17, verse 10, it says, "A rebuke impresses a discerning person more than 100 lashes a fool." In Proverbs chapter 23, verse 9, it says, "Do not speak to fools, for they will scorn your prudent words." Basically, what Proverbs is saying is that we don't need to spend our time correcting everyone. Okay, if a person is not willing to have a reasonable conversation, then it's pointless trying to be like, hey, you did this wrong. It's not a reflection of how correct your advice is. It makes no difference how true or valuable what you're saying is. If the hearer refuses to even consider it, then the attempt itself is wasted. And often when the Proverbs talks when Proverbs, in the book of Proverbs, they talk about fools, they're depicting someone who's like stubborn and thick-headed. It's not that that person is stupid in terms of their intellect, but it's their intent. They just don't even want to hear it. And the thing is, if someone is dead set on something, no amount of like nagging or correction can change their mind. And I think as long as we have done what we can, then the the outcome of the situation, that's up to them. So then, how should we correct someone? Well, some people suggest doing like a compliment sandwich. So that's when you start with something good, and then hit them with the correction, and then finish with something else good. So that's definitely one way to do it. I think a simple, just like good, and then what can be improved is also fine. And remember, correction is always about someone's behavior, right? It's not about someone's value. So when you're trying to correct someone, make sure you separate what they do from who they are. And now these next tips aren't necessarily in chronological order. So you can just start with whatever one works best for your situation. So one tip is don't give generalizations, give examples. So instead of just saying something like, you're disorganized, say something like, hey, I noticed you missed the deadline for the report last week and it impacted the whole team's deadline, kind of timeline. Give your perspective instead of an accusation. So instead of saying something like, you didn't make the report clear, you can say, I felt like the report wasn't clear enough for the team to understand. So start with I statements, and then you can back that up with examples. So I felt like the report wasn't clear enough for the team to understand. I think that this section was missing and it could have added a lot more value, etc., etc. Make sure that the person that you're correcting has a chance to speak and explain their actions, and make sure you're listening to them. You can ask questions like, how did you find working on that report? Or like, what was your experience? What did you find difficult? What did you find easy? And then this tip is really important. Give the person concrete suggestions for how to improve. Because you don't want to just blast someone and just leave. You know, that's not helpful. You've told them what they've done wrong, but you haven't given them any way out to try and improve. So that's, for me, actually, I think that's quite cruel. It's like you've blasted them and then left them in the pit without a rope to like climb out. So continuing on with that report example, you could say something like, you know, if you're struggling to stay organized, this is an app I use to help me stay organized, or this is what I do to stay organized, to try and give them tips. Be timely about your correction. So provide feedback as soon as possible after the relevant behavior or event. And make sure the environment is right. Like, remember, we're not there to humiliate the person. So correcting someone in front of the whole class or, you know, in front of the whole team when it's not relevant to the team is not nice. Yeah, and it's not the right way to do it. So I'm nearly finished, and in our discussion groups, one of my last questions is like, if you feel like you're up for it, to open yourself up for correction. So the question is basically, ask your group, what is something that I should work on? It's totally your choice. You don't have to ask your group that question. But, you know, for those of us who do struggle with this, can I encourage you to step out? This is a safe environment for you to practice. And I will also send the truth coaches that have really helped me, and maybe you can read them to yourself before and read them to yourself afterwards. And just also a caveat, like, I know we're not all like super familiar with each other, so maybe you feel like you don't know people well enough in your group to correct them, and if that's the case, please don't correct Like, don't do it. Because remember, correction is supposed to help someone. It's for the other person. And so if you're just pulling something out of thin air because you don't know what else to correct them on, that's not helpful or genuine. So don't do it. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So I thought I would end with one more proverb tonight because it's been all about the proverbs tonight. So it's Proverbs chapter 26, verse 11, which says, "As a dog returns to his vomit, so fools repeat their folly." So I'll leave that for you guys to think about. Cool. Okay, and then I'll put the questions in.
So good, Jess.
Thank you, Jess. It's really helpful for us, not just in our relationships, but in work situations and study situations as well.
Yeah.
It's definitely a skill that we need to sharpen up.
Yeah. Oh yeah, also if you have any questions, hi.
So, if, for example, right, you're training this new person who came to your workplace. You're training them.
Is this a bit close to home?
It's just curious. And then they have like there's 10 things you need to correct them on.
Yeah.
Should you go all at once, or should you be like, okay, this amount is okay for today, and tomorrow I'll.
Well, I think you might need to weigh, like, in terms of your work, do they need to, like, is there the space to allow them to be able to only work on the 5 things today and then the 5 things tomorrow? Like, is that okay in terms of your work situation? If it's a life or death situation, I'm thinking like, Thea, in your job, if someone's done something wrong and like you're caring for a patient, then no, you need to tell all 10 things that day. But if it allows for it to be spread out, then yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.